But let's get to the actual conversation that's been had all week and who should and who shouldn't be allowed in the NASCAR Hall of Fame. I think there's been, and it all really started with Travis on the Dale Jr. download saying that he doesn't think Justin Allgaier is a Hall of Famer. And I think there is a debate there. I personally would put him as a Hall of Famer, but I definitely think there is a debate. If Allgaier continues this season and ends up winning another championship, at that point there is zero debate. He's probably even a first ballot Hall of Famer at that point. There would be no debate at that point if he continues on this run that he currently is this season. But I will agree that there is a debate to be made with Justin Allgaier. But then Travis took it one step further in saying that he doesn't think that stuff outside of the Cup Series should really count to get into the NASCAR Hall of Fame. And I am 100% dead set against that because the Truck Series, the Busch Series, or the O'Reilly, whatever you want to call it, that really built out the sport to be bigger and better than it ever was. And drivers like Ron Hornaday really kind of made that happen. And then the lower divisions, I think Denny made a good point on social media that lower divisions, like below the Truck Series, don't really have as much of an impact as they used to back in the day. And I would agree with that. Maybe drivers that are racing in the NASCAR Weekly Series, like throughout the country, like your Bowman Gray people and all of that stuff, maybe they shouldn't get in the Hall of Fame. Not sure. I guess when that moment comes, we'll have to talk about it. But these local short track guys from like the 80s, the 70s, the 60s, the 50s, they got to be Hall of Famers because they're the ones that really, the sport was really built on their back. Like they were the ones that really, the sport was built on their back. NASCAR wouldn't be nearly as big without a lot of those guys from back in the day. Like your Ray Hendricks, like drivers like that. Like NASCAR wouldn't be what it is without these guys. So I'm under the opinion that it's the NASCAR Hall of Fame, not the Cup Series Hall of Fame. I think that's been something that's been said a lot, that some people consider it a Cup Series Hall of Fame. Some people consider it a NASCAR Hall of Fame. And I want to get the boys' thoughts on this. And I'll start with Cory on this because I'm not exactly sure where Cory stands on this. I kind of know some of his opinions, but I don't know exactly where he stands on this. I'm quite curious. Cory, how do you feel about this NASCAR Hall of Fame debate? Take the Allgaier stuff out of it, but just the Hall of Fame, who should get in, who shouldn't get in?
I think it's a mindset. It's two different eras. I think honestly, we just got to think about it in that way. I think that if you were to look at the Truck Series, the Nationwide, sorry, I almost said Nationwide, the Truck Series, the O'Reilly Series, and the Cup Series right now, there's nobody in the Truck Series that's even worth mentioning for Hall of Fame. And then Allgaier's the only one you can even mention worthy of being a Hall of Fame nominee, maybe in the O'Reilly series, and then in the Cup series you have a handful, right? So if you look at it within the last 5 years, I understand what he meant. I understand what Travis meant by if you just look at the Cup series, you have Hall of Famers, and then when you look at the O'Reilly series, you got maybe one if you want to consider it. So I can see where he's coming from, but like you said, like NASCAR's history was built off of O'Reilly drivers in the past. It's built off of Truck Series drivers in the past. You have Kyle Busch. Like if you just went off his championship and his Cup Series stats, do you feel the exact same way? If it was just his Cup stats, but no, he won so many times in these other series. So if you want to consider those stats for Kyle Busch's Hall of Fame nomination, you have to think about those people in the series below that are getting wins, that are getting championships, that are contributing to the sport as a whole. So I agree. I understand Travis's point of view if you were to think about the last 5 years of the sport, but you can't just forget about the last 100 years of the sport. You know what I mean? It's like that's why I understand both point of views. I'm not. I yeah, O'Reilly and Truck and Lower should get in, but they have to, like what Denny said, they have to have a damn
Outstanding
good
record.
rap sheet to get in. Like you're getting in with names like Dale Earnhardt, Richard Petty, Jimmy Johnson, Jeff Gordon. Like you got to think about all those names when you're voting them in. But at the same time, like what they did for the sport not just on the racetrack needs to be mentioned as well. Like you're talking about Jeff Burton, who's still out there helping the sport and being a name and being a person that gets interviewed, helping the sport get views and helping people understand the sport. All that needs to be thought about when you're voting for someone in the Hall of Fame. It's different from other sports.
Yeah, I would agree for sure because it's a lot different from other sports. Because in other sports, for example, like the NFL, the people that are going to get into the Hall of Fame are going to be players and coaches. And that's really it. It's players and coaches. In NASCAR, you're going to have engineers and stuff like that get into Hall of Fame. You're going to have people that never necessarily made it to the big leagues. I guess you could say the Cup Series make it to the Hall of Fame, whether that's O'Reilly or the trucks or even just the local divisions like local short track racing. You're going to have drivers make it to the Hall of Fame, and you have to take into account what they did after, what the impact they made on the sport, the legacy that they have when it comes to the sport. What did they do after they finished racing? And that's why I think Jeff Burton would be a big contender for the Hall of Fame, because not even necessarily, he was a great driver. I'm not saying he was a bad driver, but Jeff Burton's done more for the sport after, similar to Dale Jr. He's done more for the sport after he retired than when he was racing, because he's been kind of the leader of the driver alliance or whatever you want to call it. He kind of leads all that stuff. He has for a number of years. So he's done a lot for the sport, not just on TV. He's done so much to be a mentor to a lot of these drivers and just an heir to the sport, I guess you could say. So Jeff Burton would be a good example for that. And I don't know. I don't know. This debate, I feel like, got a little bit out of hand on Twitter. Feelings were hurt. My feelings were hurt. I'm not going to fake. My feelings were hurt a little bit on it. It got really deep, I would say. But Tyler, what were your thoughts on this Hall of Fame conversation on who should get in, who shouldn't get in?
I don't think people should take the last 5 years in consideration. I understand why people are, but the last 5 years is a little blip in reality. So like all of these Hall of Fame people are going into the Hall of Fame after 20, 25 years, and I know in the last 5 years things have changed a lot, but I don't think that changes who's going to make it into the Hall of Fame. You always will have to do something great. You will always have to do something to change the sport, be a name, whatever it is to make the Hall of Fame. It doesn't matter where you come from in this sport to get in the Hall of Fame.
Yeah, I feel like in those lower divisions like O'Reilly and in the trucks, you need to have an outstanding record, and you can't be around for like a year or two either. You gotta be around. You gotta have a legacy. You gotta be the guy, and that's why I'm big on Justin Allgaier getting to the Hall of Fame, because he's been the guy. Like every single year for the last 10 years, he's been the favorite to win the championship. Every single year. He only has one, but every single year he's always the biggest threat for that. He's always winning a bunch of races. He's been the guy to beat in that series. Matt Crafton, even though he had a difficult last couple of years of his career, throughout most of his career, he was one of those guys as well. I don't know if I definitely wouldn't have either of them as a first ballot Hall of Famer, but both of them I would say are Hall of Famers in their own right, I would say. I know people have differing opinions on that, but I am using Crafton and Allgaier as an example. I would say, in my opinion, I'd say they're Hall of Famers, but you can use whatever example you want, like Jack Sprague. Like Jack Sprague, he's a nominee. You got Randy LaJoie, he's a nominee right now. They could both go into the Hall of Fame. I don't think they should on this ballot at some point. Maybe they both get in. Sam Ard needs to get in, though. That's who really needs to get in. Like, geez. But let us know your thoughts in the comments. How do you feel about this whole entire Hall of Fame conversation? Who deserves to get into the Hall of Fame? Who shouldn't? Where should the boundaries, the fence kind of be for who gets into the Hall of Fame and who doesn't? Let us know your thoughts in the comments.